You may not know this, but one of the things that's a good thing to do if you're a pastor is read regularly. So I try to do that. And one of the publications that's in my regular reading, you may not have heard of it before. It's called Sports Illustrated. And maybe this is weird about me, but one of the things I love to read in Sports Illustrated, there's always an issue that comes out about the money and the money that athletes have blown, like millions and millions of dollars. And when I read it, I'm thinking, like, how could that happen? How could you blow that much money and now you were worth X number of multi-millions and now you're bankrupt? Like, that's got to be hard, right? Is it hard to blow that much money? I don't know how that could happen. In a totally unrelated issue, I was reading an article about a pop star, like he's a singer, songwriter, who has written some of the best songs for weddings and romance. And he openly admitted, he said, because of his addiction to porn, he said, I don't feel like I can actually have a romantic or sexual relationship with a real person, even though at the time he was dating a supermodel. People who would get married and walk down the aisle to his songs, he would say, great, I just can't have that. But it isn't just people that would show up on TMZ. You might think about maybe a story of a manager in your company who gets caught stealing money from the firm to cover a huge gambling debt. And he loses his job and maybe has to face jail time. Or a friend or a teammate who's caught possessing and distributing drugs, gets kicked off the team, maybe gets suspended from school. Or perhaps two coworkers at a church who end up having an affair together and they get fired and the church gets ripped apart. Whatever the story is, whatever the scandal is, it's very easy for us to talk about it and to gossip about it. And sometimes as we're doing that, we might even say out loud or say under our breath or say to ourselves or say to someone around us, I would never do that. I would never do that. We'd say, like, what an idiot, or we might have some sympathy for them, but how could they do that, right? How could they let that happen? Like, if I had that much money, I would never. If I was dating that person, I would never. If I had that job, I would never. If I had to make that decision, I would never choose this. We think, I would never do that. And maybe that's kind of a natural inclination. Maybe we're not saying it out of spite. Maybe it is out of sympathy or just incredulity. But it's a natural thing to say, and yet we have to be careful. In part because no one thinks they would do that, right? Let me say it this way. No one, maybe you've heard me say this before, no one draws a line from where they are standing to a ditch and says, that's where I'm going, right? Nobody plans to end up in a ditch. People don't make tons of money planning on losing it all. Couples don't say I do, planning on blowing up the marriage and perhaps the whole family with an affair years later. People don't take the job of their dreams planning to get caught in a scandal later. It's not something anybody thinks they would do. So saying I would never do that might not be the first thing that should come to our lips. And in fact, it's possibly dangerous to look at or read stories, whether they're famous people in the public sphere or just people within our own sphere of influence or in our school or in our family or in our workplace. It's dangerous on a couple of levels. First, to say, I would never do that, or to think that, or to sort of act like that, allows self-righteousness to creep in, right? I would never do that. What we're doing when we say it or think is we're subtly putting distance between us and that stupid or that foolish or that immoral person. I would never do that. And this is actually, self-righteousness is actually a toxin that can come into our heart and infect it. And it is particularly dangerous, or those who are susceptible to it are the ones who have never done that. Right? It is the particular danger for those who have lived well or who have never had an epic fail or a fall. So it's dangerous to allow self-righteousness in. But it's also foolish to say, I would never do that. Because what that means is you'll never do anything to prevent it. In other words, the only basis you have for saying that is your own conviction that you would never do that. It's your own confidence that's telling you you would never do that. It's foolish because you're not making a plan to make sure it doesn't happen. You're just saying, that would never be me. I would never do that. Or maybe we say, I will never do that again. And so the basis on which we're sure that will never happen to us is simply our own confidence or our own ability to say, that would never be me. I would never do that. If we get to that place, friends, we may be living in the danger of the illusion of invincibility. That it is actually a lie, an illusion, because no one thinks it'll happen to them. And it could actually happen to anyone. If I can say it this way, every one of us is just a few steps away from a decision we thought we would never make. And if you asked any of the famous people or any of the people that are famous to you because of decisions they made, after they made them, if they thought, if they were planning they would ever get there, most of them, I would bet, say, no, I never thought I would make this decision. I never thought I would do that. And most of us are just a few steps away from a decision we never thought we'd make. And here's the thing. A regrettable decision takes a moment to make, but a lifetime to pay for. Right? A regrettable decision can take a moment to make, but possibly a lifetime to pay for. And therefore, we owe it to ourselves, to our loved ones, to our friends, to our world, to the people we lead, to the people we're connected to the teams we're a part of and the teams we lead, to have a better view and to actually think differently about ourselves and to actually live differently. Saying, I would never do that is not enough. And so really over these next 5 weeks, hopefully I haven't bummed you out today, but hey, listen, we owe it to the people around us. This is important stuff. This is happening all around us. And it is foolish and dangerous to think I would never do that. So for the next 5 weeks, we're actually going to talk about how do we begin to think differently and live differently about it so that ultimately we can live with no regrets. And so that's really what we're doing over these next 5 weeks. If you're new or new to church, if you're new to faith, if you're exploring faith, none of what I have just said is only relevant for people of faith or people on a journey of faith, right? This is just the world we live in. And so hopefully this will be a series that will be helpful for you in learning to think differently and live differently. You know, the scriptures actually have a ton of wisdom that speaks directly to this issue and to these things. Some of it by way of teaching, like direct teaching that addresses these issues head on, and we're actually going to get to that in the coming weeks. But some of the ways Scripture teaches us is through the lives, the cautionary tales of real life people and their stories that thankfully were included in Scripture for us. And where we begin today is, I think, the most haunting and sobering story about this whole issue and about this idea of like that I would never do that is a bit of a lie or a myth or the illusion of invincibility. The story is of a man named Solomon. He's actually Israel's third king. You may not know this, but the first half of the Bible, what we call the Old Testament, is actually the story of God's relationship with people that become a nation, from which Jesus is a descendant of the nation of Israel. But the goal was that the whole world, that Israel would be a blessing to the whole world, that God would eventually have a multi-ethnic community and people that were his and to whom we belonged. But he started with one nation, Israel. And Solomon was Israel's third king. And the story of Solomon is one that begins with immense goodness and blessing. He's actually the son of King David, Israel's greatest king. Under David, sort of the empire or the nation of Israel reached its political and military and economic zenith. It had peace on every side, and it was well established in the capital city of Jerusalem. And David was beloved by the people of Israel, and Solomon was his son who became king after him. We find out actually that Solomon wasn't just sort of someone from, sort of good pedigree, but that he was actually an incredibly humble and wise person. He tells a story of God coming to him in a dream when he was first becoming king and asking him, hey, as a blessing, as a gift for you becoming king, what do you want? And Solomon actually said, I need wisdom. I don't know how to do this thing, this king thing, this lady. I can't lead these people without wisdom. And God says, oh, you've asked for the best thing a leader could ask for. And because of that, I'm going to bless you with everything. And what we find out is Solomon's wisdom not only helped him make really good decisions and govern his nation well, it actually made him, he said he was wise in matters of economics and nature and science and all this stuff. And so the kingdom grows economically and socially and politically under his leadership. And so we find out he's not only very wise, but he becomes very wealthy and actually very famous. He's also actually very generous, like he blesses the people, the nation thrives under him, and he has great faith. He finally actually builds the temple, a temple for God. God, up to that point, had told his people, hey, build a tent for me. I will meet with you in this tent. It was kind of their worship space. There was no actual permanent temple. And so Solomon builds this incredibly beautiful temple for God. And if you read his story in the first half of the book of Kings, there's 2 books of Kings that record the history of Israel's kings. In the first half, you read Solomon, when he builds the temple, he prays this amazing prayer. He says, God, even the highest heavens cannot contain you, how much less this temple that we built with our hands. But here, would you come and meet with us in this place? And it says in that when the God's presence came into that temple like a cloud and filled it so much that the worship service had to shut down because nobody could see anything. It was actually a way of God saying, I'm with you, I'm blessing you, I'm so pleased with you. I want you to listen to this summary statement of just how incredible Solomon's leadership was as we read in 1 Kings chapter 10, verses 23 to 27. So King Solomon became richer and wiser than any other king on earth. People from every nation came to consult him and to hear the wisdom God had given him. Year after year, everyone who visited brought him gifts of silver and gold, clothing, weapons, spices, horses, and mules. Solomon built up a large force of chariots and horses. He had 1,400 chariots and 12,000 horses. He stationed some of them in the chariot cities and some near him in Jerusalem. Listen to this. The king made silver as plentiful in Jerusalem as stone, and valuable cedar timber was as common as the sycamore fig trees that grow in the foothills of Judah. It's just a little summary statement of all that Solomon had done and had become. That in a sense, he was someone of great pedigree, right? His father, King David, he had come from great stock, good family background. He had made great decisions, right? He was a very wise person. It says that he had great success, like very wealthy and great fame, people coming from all over the place. But also great character, like he was a generous person. Making silver and cedar as available as common materials in the city meant the whole city was better. Like everybody benefited from Solomon. He was a generous person, and he had great faith. He built this amazing temple and has this amazing relationship with God. Which makes what happens next completely incomprehensible. Something that no one saw coming. Listen to what the very next chapter says. Now, or in some of your translations, probably better, but King Solomon loved many foreign women. Besides Pharaoh's daughter, he married women from Moab, Ammon, Edom, Sidon, and from among the Hittites. The Lord had clearly instructed the people of Israel, you must not marry them because they will turn your hearts to other gods. Yet Solomon insisted on loving them anyway. He had 700 wives of royal birth and 300 concubines. And in fact, they did turn his heart away from the Lord. In Solomon's old age, they turned his heart to worship other gods instead of being completely faithful to the Lord his God as his father David had been. Solomon worshipped Ashtoreth, the goddess of the Sidonians, and Moloch, the detestable god of the Ammonites. In this way, Solomon did what was evil in the Lord's sight. He refused to follow the Lord completely as his father David had done. On the Mount of Olives, east of Jerusalem, he even built a pagan shrine for Chemosh, the detestable god of Moab, and another for Moloch, the detestable god of the Ammonites. Solomon built such shrines for all his foreign wives to use for burning incense and sacrificing to their gods. The word polygamy falls a little short of describing what Solomon got into. And it's easy possibly to be distracted by the 700 wives and 300 concubines. And even aside from how oppressive a system that would have even been to the women involved in that and caught in that, we cannot miss the significance of what the turn of events is describing here in chapter 11. See, in one sense, Solomon was doing what was very customary for other kings of other nations around him. This is what kings of all of the nations that Solomon was surrounded by would have done, would have taken many wives and many concubines from other places. That would have been normal. And yet, God had said, actually many chapters before, if you go back to the book of Deuteronomy, one of the books we skip when they're reading the Bible because we lose track and get a bit bored. But one of the things God had said, even long before they had kings or leaders, this says, hey, you as my people, you're going to be different. You're not going to be like the nations around because you're my people. I am your God. I am your king. But no leader or king among you in the future should have multiple wives. God had actually forbid it. And further, to not marry people from outside their faith and their ethnicity, which sounds for us in like 21st century modern ears, is God just kind of racist or like ethnocentric and megalomaniac? Is he like, you can only worship me, I don't want you to worship other gods? Well, Solomon didn't pay any attention to it. But why was God saying that? Well, it actually explains why, what he was keeping him from. And Solomon running through the stop sign, what ends up happening. It names 3 specific gods in this passage that Solomon built shrines for, and all of those are significant. And let me just explain a little bit of the background. He mentions, the writer mentions the god Ashtoreth, the god Chemosh, and the god Moloch. And that Solomon gets involved in worship of these gods and actually builds shrines for them. Ashtoreth was the god, she was the female god of fertility and sexual desire. And so what would happen in the worship services of this god was public cult prostitution. And God has said, I don't want you to do that in front of people. I don't want you to do that to yourselves and to each other. That is not a part of worship of me, so don't worship that God, because that's what you'll end up doing. And it says Solomon built and worshiped that God. And Chemosh and Moloch, historians and commentators note that part of the worship services in the shrines that it says where they offered sacrifices involved making their children walk through fire or walk along fiery coals, or in some cases even offering them as child sacrifices in the fire. So this is not about God being racist or ethnocentric. In fact, we know God's plan was to have a multi-ethnic, multi-generational community be his church. But he was protecting his people from a worship and a lifestyle that was exploitative, dangerous, and actually destructive to themselves and each other. And so he had forbid Solomon to do that, to benchmark his life off the culture around him. And Solomon did it anyway. I mean, think about how much this changed. Like Solomon, someone who built the temple to worship God, in a little while later is actually building temples to worship all these other gods and cult prostitution and child sacrifice, possibly even his own children through these other wives. This is a stunning and sad story that, can I just say this, nobody saw coming. It's not like you could have looked at how his story started and say, oh yeah, he's heading for disaster, right? It's not like you could have seen it. In fact, all we see is great pedigree, great success, great wisdom, great humility, great character, great wealth. And instead, we see a crash, an epic fail. And listen, not just Solomon. If you read on in the rest of the book of Kings and 2 Kings, you will find out that at the turning point of his life, then he sets in motion a runaway train that plunges off a cliff. Within a generation, his own son split the nation in half. The nation becomes divided. Within a couple of years, one half of the nation gets obliterated in deportation by the army of Assyria. And a couple hundred years after that, the other half of the nation gets deported to Babylon through the Babylonian Empire. And it basically looks like from Solomon, it was a downward slide. This is stunning. That the fate of the entire kingdom turned on his decisions, and nobody saw it coming. It is a sobering, cautionary tale. I can't even think actually of any other story in Scripture where someone started out with such goodness and such character and such blessing and ended up in such disaster of a catastrophic nature, not only to himself and his family and multiple generations, but hundreds of generations, an entire nation. I think that if nothing else, it cautions us to say, maybe I would never do that is a bit of an illusion. Maybe it moves us from, I would never do that to, I could fully do that. I am quite capable of things that I never imagined I could or would do, right? It's a cautionary tale to say, hey, no amount of great pedigree, great family background, great history, no amount of great faith or great humility or great success or great wisdom means that there isn't a fall in our future. Which perhaps that makes you feel like, well, okay, like then how do I not just live in panic and anxiety and paranoia about what choices I might make? Well, let's get under that a little bit. The problem is, I think in part, that we only see the epic fail. We only look at the thing that shows up in the newspapers or the thing that seems very visibly wrong or immoral or dysfunctional or broken. We only see the full-blown addiction. We only see the affair. We only see the misconduct. We only see the criminal charge. We only see the acting out, and that's what gets the headline and the attention. But what we don't see is the 100 little steps before the scandal that weren't scandalous in and of themselves. The 100 little steps before the crash that didn't look dangerous at all. The 100 little steps before the addiction that seemed perfectly innocent. Friends, we have to actually rewind the tape from the fail and the fall to see what actually happened before. And if we look at the life of Solomon, I mean, this didn't happen overnight. I mean, I'm being partly facetious saying, like, you don't marry 700 women overnight. I mean, even if you had 2 wedding ceremonies a day, that would take a year. Like, that's not what happened. It was one decision that led to another over the whole trajectory of Solomon's life. And through this time, he seems to be either explicitly or implicitly running through stop signs, all of the danger signals and signs along the way that he was not paying attention to. First of all, God had given him a boundary. Do not have multiple wives, and do not marry outside our faith. Do not marry people who worship someone other than me. God gave him a boundary, and he ran through it. And he ran through it 700 times, apparently. It looks like here he was accountable to no one. Like even in his father David's story, there were prophets, there were people. One time in David's life, a prophet came and convicted him saying, you're wrong. You are way over the line here. You need to repent. There's no accountability. It doesn't look like Solomon asked anybody for wisdom or input. Maybe that was because he just figured, hey, I'm the wisest one. People are coming to me for input. Sometimes that happens when you get into leadership positions or you get promoted or you're the one that everyone goes to. Who do you go to? And whether that was an innocent thing or whether that was his own pride and saying, I don't need that, it doesn't seem that he was accountable to anyone. And of course, he's the king. He can do whatever he wants. He would have to look for accountability. Thirdly, it seems his measuring stick was the culture around him, not the way God had asked him to conduct himself. His measuring stick was, well, this is what all the other kings, this is what a king does, instead of saying, God says, no, this is what my king does. This is what I want you to do. And apparently he was unaware of his vulnerabilities. It says he loved many foreign women and possibly even his family history. You know, even this account kind of glosses over and puts David in a sort of I think an unhealthily positive light because his own father had multiple wives. His own father had opened the door to this behavior in his life, and he was unaware of his vulnerabilities and unaware of his family history. I mean, in summary, if I can say it this way, he had the wrong foundation and a poor plan. He had a wrong foundation and a poor plan. His foundation was self-confidence, trusting in himself, accountable to no one, running through God's stop signs, ignoring him. And he had no plan. His plan was to just mimic the culture and the ways of the people around him and his family before him. He had a bad foundation, wrong foundation, and a poor plan. So what does that mean for us as we look at his life and think, is this a cautionary tale? If we're saying, hey, you know what, I'm going to move from like, I would never do that to I could fully do that. I'm capable of all kinds of things that today I think I would never do. I'm 1 or 2 steps away from a decision I never thought I'd make, a regrettable decision that would take a moment to make and a lifetime to pay for. To honestly make that move, and I think then to move one step further to a prayer, instead of saying, I would never do that, say, Jesus, I never want to do that. Jesus, I never want to do that. You know what that is? That's a good foundation and a new plan. A better foundation and a better plan, right? When we begin the sentence not with I would never do it, say, Jesus, 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 God help me. You are my foundation. I don't put any confidence in my history, in my good behavior, in my family background, in my righteousness, in my humility, in my character, in how other people see me, in how my success, whatever's going on in my life, my confidence, my foundation has to be on you, Jesus, not I. Our sentence begins with Jesus, not I, Jesus. You are the better foundation. We sing, the rock on which I stand. My confidence is not in me. It's not in I. It's in you. And secondly, I need a better plan, right? When we say, Jesus, I never want to do that. When you say, I never want to do that, you know what follows? Therefore, I'm going to do this. I'm going to do this, do this, do this. I never want that to happen. If you say, that'll never be me, that's a full stop, period. I don't need to do anything because my own confidence tells me that'll never be me. My own statement of assurance is my confidence that that'll never happen to me. When we say, I never want that to happen, it's going to lead us to say, therefore, I need to do this, I need to do this, I need to do this. I need a better plan, a better foundation, Jesus, and a better plan. Lord, I don't want to do this, so therefore. And really that's, friends, what we're going to unpack over these next few weeks, a better foundation and a better plan, so that you and I can have a confidence. We don't have to live with paranoia and fear, but we can have a better foundation in Jesus and a better plan for how we want to live differently and think differently to end up with decisions that we don't have to regret. Kind of as we end today, I just want to give us some time to reflect on this, because I know I've thrown a lot at you. And some of what this is just the wisdom to say, maybe for some of you, it's landing right where you're at. Maybe there are some regrets in your life, or maybe you're like, oh man, I'm in a dangerous spot. Maybe some of you are like, oh, it's kind of out of left field. I haven't even been thinking about this. But if we can just all admit we're all in the same boat, we're all a couple steps away from things we never thought we'd do. Just ask anyone who's done something they never thought they would do. And so I want to take a moment just to give you some time to do a little bit of an audit reflection in your life. And I'm just going to ask you a couple questions, give you time as we read through them, just to think about them. Is there any unhealthy or destructive pattern in my family background? By that I mean parents, uncles, aunts, cousins, grandparents, great-grandparents. Any destructive or unhealthy pattern in my family background of addiction? And that may be to substances or porn or food or gambling or something. Addictive behavior. Is there any of that background in my family? And if you don't know, ask your parents, ask around. Is there a history of infidelity in any of the family relationships in my background? Right? What's in my background? Solomon was unaware of that or uninterested in it. Is there any history of greed or financial mismanagement in my family? Or perhaps just something that was lied about or covered up, any pattern or history of deceit, things that were hidden or kept or not told or secrets or all of that. Is that part of the family history in my story? I want to become aware of that. Second question, has my spouse or close friend commented that I blank a little too much? I drink a little too much. I game a little too much. I shop a little too much. Whatever that is. Someone close to you saying, hey, you do that again? You do that a lot. Is there anything I'm subtly hiding or downplaying from my spouse or family? Like they know about it, but they don't know everything about it, or they don't know it at all. And I'm kind of like, oh, I don't need to tell them. If it was a big deal, I'd tell them, but this is not a big deal. They don't need to know. Is there anything you're kind of hiding? Have I caught myself saying or thinking, well, this is normal for everyone else? Everyone does this. This is not weird. This is not strange. This is not bad. This is what everyone does, right? This is that whole idea of the measuring stick being the culture around us. Is there anyone with whom you are completely honest about your life? Like about what's going on in your life, under the surface? Is there anyone? And then this one, is there anyone in your life who has the right to veto your decisions? Like to disagree with you or say, I don't think that's a good call, or I don't think you should do that, or I think you should stop. Is there anyone that you've given veto right to in your life? These are some questions to help us begin and put us in a posture to really, prepare ourselves for this series. One other next step as we're going through it, on May the 4th, we have our renewal prayer day. It's a day where you can book an appointment to have a renewal prayer appointment. That's where a couple of our trained prayer ministers will pray for you just personally with nobody else for whatever you need. But if there's something that comes up during this series, you're like, yeah, I need prayer for that. I need help with that. I need to get a better foundation in my life on Jesus through that. Renewal prayer appointment would be a great thing to do. And so you'll hear about that in the coming weeks. And lastly, I just want to invite you to lean into this series, but don't do it alone. Don't do it alone. That's one of the themes of these reflection questions is secrets, hiding, solo missions, being unaccountable, being alone. We don't want to do that. There are people in this community that you can ask to journey with you, people in your home group, people in our church. You don't have to do it alone. One of the amazing things about making Jesus our foundation, it's not only that we draw our strength and our confidence and the power to live well and think differently from him, from this Holy Spirit that he gives, that it comes from him, not from us. It's not I, it's Jesus. Is not only do we draw that from him, that he's our foundation, but he's also the one who shows us grace when we fall, right? If it's all up to me and my confidence, then when I fail, when I fall, man, all I have is me. And the world around us, quite frankly, as someone once said, baits us to the edge, but then vilifies us and criticizes us and cancels us when we cross it. Jesus is the one who strengthens us and invites us to live better, with a better plan and a better foundation. But he has grace for us when we fall.